I'm Cedric, 32 years old, living in Boston, where I've built a life far from my family's judgmental eyes. Growing up, I was always the disappointment, while my sister Amanda was the golden child who could do no wrong. Last Thanksgiving, my father called from the hospital needing money but still managed to say, "Your sister is successful and responsible, unlike you doesn't need help." Little did he know his perfect daughter was drowning in debt while I was the one who could actually save them. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been unfairly compared to a sibling. Growing up in suburban Chicago during the 90s, our brick two-story house projected the image of the perfect middle-class American family. My father Richard worked as a bank manager at First National, a position he reminded us of whenever he wanted to emphasize the importance of financial responsibility and conventional success. His stern demeanor rarely softened, especially around me. He wore pressed shirts even on weekends and expected everyone to live by his rigid standards of achievement. My mother Eleanor had been an elementary school teacher before giving up her career to raise Amanda and me. She was quieter than my father, often deferring to his opinions and smoothing over tense moments with offers of freshly baked cookies or gentle changes of subject. While she occasionally defended me in private, she never contradicted my father in front of us. Their bedroom was across from mine, and many nights I heard their muffled arguments about me through the wall, my mother's soft pleading, usually giving way to my father's firm declarations. Our living room displayed the family's priorities with painful clarity. The mantelpiece and walls featured Amanda's achievements in chronological order. Her elementary school, spelling, B trophy, middle school, perfect attendance certificate, high school valedictorian plaque, and college acceptance letters. My mother had created a special shadow box for Amanda's Ivy League acceptance letter, positioning it so it was the first thing visitors noticed when entering our home. My own accomplishments in art competitions and creative writing contests were relegated to a small bulletin board in the laundry room if they were displayed at all. When I won first place in a statewide youth art competition at 14, my father's response was, "That's nice, but it's just a hobby." Amanda's science fair project could earn her a college scholarship. Family dinners became showcases for Amanda's latest achievements. Amanda got another A on her calculus test, my father would announce, proudly cutting into his pot roast. "She's definitely going to be valedictorian." Meanwhile, my B in English literature, my favorite subject, went unmentioned, even though I'd worked harder for that B than Amanda ever did for her effortless, as in math and science. I became the invisible child, unless I was being criticized. When I entered the room, conversations about Amanda's achievements continued as if I weren't there. When I spoke up about my own interests or accomplishments, my comments were met with polite nods before the conversation swiftly returned to Amanda. School only reinforced the comparisons. Teachers who had taught Amanda 3 years earlier would look at my test papers with disappointment. "Amanda always scored perfect marks on these tests," they'd say, handing back my B+ papers. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" The question followed me through elementary school into high school, from math teachers to soccer coaches. My learning style differed completely from Amanda's. While she excelled at memorization and test-taking, I learned through hands-on experience and creative expression. I could design and build a working model for science class, but struggled with the written exams. My parents interpreted this as laziness rather than a different kind of intelligence. The contrast in how we were treated became impossible to ignore when Amanda graduated high school. For her achievement, my parents gifted her a brand new Honda Civic with a big red bow in the driveway. When I graduated 3 years later, not as valedictorian but still with honors and an art scholarship to a local community college, I received a set of used textbooks my father thought would help me focus on practical subjects. The message was clear: Amanda deserved rewards. I needed correction. The summer before college brought the first major conflict about our futures. Amanda had been accepted to Cornell's business program, my father's dream. I wanted to study graphic design at the Art Institute of Chicago, a school with an excellent reputation in the arts but not the prestigious name my father valued. "Art school," my father scoffed over dinner one night. "That's not a real education, Cedric. You'll never make a living drawing pictures." "It's not just drawing pictures, Dad," I argued. It's graphic design. It's a growing field with real career opportunities. Listen to your father, my mother interjected softly. He knows about the business world. The argument escalated until my father delivered his ultimatum. If you want our financial support, you'll study business or accounting at a proper university. Otherwise, you're on your own. I chose to be on my own. I enrolled in the community college while working 30 hours a week at a local print shop. My parents told relatives I couldn't get into a good school, rather than admitting I had chosen a different path. At family gatherings, aunts and uncles would pat my shoulder sympathetically while praising Amanda's Ivy League achievement. For 3 years I worked and studied, saving every penny toward transferring to art school. My parents' home became increasingly uncomfortable, every conversation circling back to how I should be more practical, more focused, more like Amanda. The day I finally had enough savings to move to Boston and attend my dream school was the day I felt I could breathe freely for the first time. Amanda's life after college appeared to follow the perfect trajectory my parents had envisioned. She graduated from Cornell with honors in business administration and immediately landed a job at McKinley Consulting, a prestigious firm with offices in downtown Chicago. Her starting salary was impressive enough that my parents mentioned the figure to everyone who would listen, though they never disclosed that they had helped her secure the position through my father's banking connections. Within a year of graduation, Amanda moved into a luxury apartment in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. My parents helped furnish it with expensive furniture from Restoration Hardware, and Williams-Sonoma spending what must have been thousands of dollars to ensure her home reflected the success story they wanted to project. When relatives visited Chicago, Amanda's apartment became a mandatory stop on the tour, with my mother proudly showing off the view of Lake Michigan from the 23rd floor. The pinnacle of Amanda's apparent success story came when she got engaged to Bradley, a tax attorney from a wealthy North Shore family. The diamond on her finger was almost obscenely large, and the engagement party at the Chicago Yacht Club became the subject of dozens of framed photos throughout my parents' house. My mother called every extended family member to share the news, always ending with, "They're just perfect together, both so successful and responsible." Meanwhile, my path looked drastically different, at least from the outside. After community college, I had saved enough to transfer to a respected design school in Boston. I lived in a studio apartment in Allston, a neighborhood filled with students and young professionals rather than luxury high-rises. My furniture came from thrift stores and sidewalk finds refurbished with my own hands. Instead of one prestigious job, I worked several waiting tables at night, doing freelance design work during the day, and taking on weekend shifts at a local print shop to build industry connections. What my family didn't see, or chose not to see, was that beneath the surface our financial realities were inverting. Amanda's consulting job required her to maintain an expensive wardrobe, eat at high-end restaurants with clients, and project success through visible consumption. Her salary, while impressive on paper, barely covered her rent and car payment after taxes. The gap was filled with credit cards, first 1, then 3, then 7. By her second year of employment, she was making minimum payments on over $30,000 of credit card debt. The loans from my parents began small: $2,000 for an unexpected car repair, $3,000 for a security deposit when moving to a better apartment building. These loans were never repaid, though neither Amanda nor my parents acknowledged this reality. Instead, they were written off as investments in Amanda's future success. In contrast, I lived frugally but intentionally. My apartment was small but functional, decorated with my own artwork and secondhand treasures. I made my coffee at home instead of spending $6 daily at Starbucks. I packed lunches instead of ordering delivery. Every extra dollar went first to my student loans, then to building an emergency fund, and finally to investments. By 28, I had paid off my student debt completely, a fact I never shared with my family because they never asked about my finances except to inquire if I was managing okay. The communication between us dwindled as I established my independence. Weekly phone calls became monthly, then quarterly. Each conversation followed the same pattern: brief inquiries about my work, which they never quite understood, extensive updates about Amanda's latest achievements, and subtle suggestions that perhaps it was time for me to consider a real career or move back to Chicago where they could help me get established. I stopped calling regularly when I realized I spent days recovering from each conversation, rebuilding the self-confidence that their dismissive comments eroded. They only called me when they needed technical help with their computers, or when Amanda was too busy to assist with some family matter. Family get-togethers became increasingly tense affairs, where I felt like an outsider observing a performance of familial success that excluded my reality. Yet paradoxically, this distance fostered my independence and resilience. Without the constant comparison to Amanda, I began to measure my success by my own standards. I found mentors in the design community who valued my creativity and work ethic. I built friendships with people who knew nothing about my family dynamics and therefore saw me clearly without the distorting lens of being the disappointing child. The less I sought my parents' approval, the more confidence I developed in my own path. This confidence translated into better work, more client referrals, and slowly growing financial stability. By 30, I had established a reputation in Boston's design community as someone reliable, creative, and technically skilled, everything my parents had predicted I would never become. My career breakthrough came after years of building my portfolio and network. I had been freelancing for a financial software startup, creating user interface designs for their beta version. When the company secured second-round funding, they hired me as their lead designer with a salary that made me blink twice when I saw the offer letter. This first major client opened doors to others. Financial technology companies appreciated my ability to make complex information accessible through intuitive design. I developed a specialty in creating interfaces for financial applications that made data visualization clear and actionable. My portfolio grew to include projects for investment firms, banking apps, and financial education platforms. As my professional reputation grew, so did my income. I moved from my cramped studio to a one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, still modest, but with enough space for a proper home office. Despite my improving finances, I maintained relatively frugal habits, investing in quality furniture that would last, rather than luxury brands, cooking at home most nights and putting 25% of every paycheck into savings and investments. By 31, I had established an emergency fund covering 6 months of expenses, maxed out my retirement contributions each year, and created a diversified investment portfolio that grew steadily. I worked with a financial advisor to make smart decisions about taxes and long-term planning. Without the pressure to display wealth through material possessions, I built actual wealth through careful management and compound interest. Meanwhile, Amanda's carefully constructed facade began showing cracks. Her consulting career involved frequent job changes, each presented to the family as a strategic move, but actually resulting from burnout or performance issues. Each new position came with a slightly higher title and salary, but also increased expectations and pressure. Her wedding to Bradley was an extravagant affair at the Chicago Botanic Gardens, with 300 guests, a 10-piece band, and a 5-course dinner. What no one mentioned was that my parents had withdrawn money from their retirement accounts to pay for it, believing this investment in maintaining appearances was worth the long-term financial risk. Shortly after the wedding, Amanda began calling me with requests for small loans, always with a plausible explanation and promises of quick repayment. My commission check is delayed, or we have a temporary cash flow issue until Bradley's bonus comes through. At first, I transferred the money without question, assuming her need was genuine. After the third unreimbursed loan, I began asking more questions, which resulted in fewer calls but greater distance between us. What I didn't know then was that Amanda's marriage was already showing strain from financial secrets. Bradley had discovered some of her credit cards, but not all of them. Their arguments about money became more frequent. Amanda's shopping habits, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, impulse purchases had evolved from occasional splurges to a full-blown addiction that she hid by having packages delivered to her office or friends' homes. Our parents remained oblivious to these realities, or perhaps willfully blind to them. At every family gathering, they continued praising Amanda's career advancement and beautiful home, while expressing concerns about my struggle in the unstable field of design. When I mentioned completing a project for a major financial institution, my father dismissed it as playing with computers rather than doing serious financial work like Amanda. "We just worry about your future security," my mother would say, patting my hand. "Creative jobs are so unpredictable. Not everyone can have Amanda's knack for business." The contrast between public perception and private reality became almost comical. At one holiday dinner, my father proudly told the extended family about Amanda's promotion, while she excused herself to make a phone call, which I later learned was to negotiate a payment extension with her credit card company. That same evening, my uncle asked if I was still drawing logos, as if my career were a hobby rather than a profession that now earned me a six-figure income. I wrestled with conflicting emotions about this situation. Part of me wanted to correct their misconceptions and prove my success. Another part recognized that their approval had become less important to my happiness than my own satisfaction with my choices. A vindictive voice occasionally suggested letting them discover Amanda's financial house of cards on their own. My mentor Daniel, a successful designer 20 years, my senior, provided valuable perspective during our weekly coffee meetings. Family narratives are powerful things, he told me once. Sometimes people need those stories to make sense of their world. Your parents need Amanda to be the success story, and you to be the cautionary tale. The question is whether you need to participate in that narrative anymore. His words helped me make peace with maintaining some distance without completely cutting ties. I called on birthdays and holidays, visited briefly at Christmas, and otherwise focused on building the life I wanted in Boston. I stopped trying to correct their misconceptions or gain their approval. This approach allowed me to preserve my mental health while acknowledging that I still cared about my family despite our difficulties. The year I turned 32 brought a significant career milestone. After years of contract work and building my reputation, I was offered a leadership position at FinTech Innovations, a Fortune 500 financial technology company, expanding their Boston office. The role came with a substantial salary increase, equity options, and a team of designers to manage. For the first time, I would be shaping not just individual projects but an entire product ecosystem. With this financial security, I took the step of purchasing my first home, a two-bedroom condominium in a converted factory building in South Boston. The space featured high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. I created a dedicated home office that doubled as a studio space where I could experiment with design concepts outside of work hours. My investment portfolio reached a significant milestone that same year, crossing into six figures, thanks to consistent contributions and market growth. I diversified into index funds, a few carefully selected individual stocks, and even made a small angel investment in a former colleague's startup. A financial advisor helped me structure my investments to minimize tax liability while maximizing long-term growth. The professional recognition I had quietly worked toward for years finally arrived in the form of a profile in Digital Design Quarterly, an industry magazine highlighting innovative approaches in user experience design. The article, titled "Humanizing Financial Data: Cedric's Intuitive Approach to FinTech Design," included interviews with clients and colleagues, praising my ability to make complex financial concepts accessible through thoughtful interface design. While my career flourished, Amanda's carefully constructed life was unraveling behind the scenes. Bradley had discovered the full extent of her credit card debt, over $100,000, spread across 12 different cards, after a collection agency called their home. The confrontation that followed revealed years of financial deception, including secret shopping habits and hidden bank accounts. Bradley moved out the following week, staying with a friend, while considering whether their 3-year marriage could be saved. The separation remained a closely guarded secret from my parents and extended family. Amanda told them Bradley was traveling for work, a fiction she maintained through elaborately staged phone calls when they visited and carefully curated social media posts suggesting marital harmony. The financial pressure intensified as Amanda struggled to maintain appearances without Bradley's income contribution. She began pawning wedding gifts when credit card minimum payments came due. Her work performance suffered as she took extended lunch breaks to deal with creditor calls or spent hours searching for balance transfer offers with introductory 0% interest rates. Her manager placed her on a performance improvement plan, adding professional stress to her personal crisis. In the midst of this hidden turmoil, our father suffered a major heart attack. My mother called early on a Tuesday morning, her voice shaking as she explained that Dad had collapsed while shoveling snow from their driveway. He was stable after emergency surgery, but would need a triple bypass and extended recovery period. The doctor says he'll need to be in the hospital for at least a week, maybe longer, my mother explained, and then months of recovery at home. I don't know how we'll manage all the appointments and medications. I immediately offered to fly home and help, but my mother hesitated. Amanda is so busy with her big project at work. She said she'll try to visit on weekends when she can. But maybe you could come since your work island. More flexible. The implication that my career was less important or demanding than Amanda's hung in the air, but I let it pass unchallenged. I'll book a flight for tomorrow, I promised. Don't worry about picking me up. I'll rent a car at the airport. What my mother didn't mention, what I would soon discover, was that their health insurance had a high deductible they couldn't afford to pay. Years of helping Amanda maintain her lifestyle had depleted their savings, and my father's medical bills would quickly exceed $20,000, even before the lengthy rehabilitation process began. The day before my flight, my father called from his hospital room. His voice sounded weaker than I had ever heard it, but his words carried the same dismissive tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Your mother says you're coming to visit," he said after minimal greeting. "That's good. We could use some help with a few things around the house while I'm laid up." "Of course," I replied. "Whatever you need." There was a long pause before he continued. "The thing is, Cedric, these medical bills are going to be substantial. The insurance doesn't cover nearly what we thought it would." "I can help with that," I offered immediately. "Don't worry about the money right now. Just focus on getting better." Another pause, longer this time. "Well, that's generous of you. We wouldn't normally ask knowing your situation. But this is an emergency." The way he emphasized situation made it clear he still viewed me as financially unstable despite never asking about my actual circumstances. "It's really no problem, Dad. I'm in a good position to help. Your sister is successful and responsible. Unlike you, doesn't need help," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "She's busy with important client meetings this month. We don't want to burden her when she's at such a critical point in her career. You understand?" The familiar sting of comparison momentarily took my breath away. Even while asking for my financial assistance, my father couldn't resist emphasizing Amanda's superiority. The absurdity of the situation finally crystallized for me. I would be paying the medical bills that my supposedly more successful sister couldn't afford to help with, while still being considered the family failure. "I understand perfectly," I said quietly. "I'll see you tomorrow, Dad." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen island for nearly an hour, processing the conversation. Then I made a decision that would ultimately change our family dynamic forever. Instead of flying home for a short visit, I packed for an extended stay. It was time to see the reality of my family's situation with clear eyes, and finally address the fiction they had maintained for so many years. The taxi dropped me off at my parents' house late Thursday afternoon. Standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase, I noticed details I had overlooked during brief holiday visits: peeling paint on the window frames, missing shingles on the roof, cracks in the concrete driveway that had been patched with asphalt filler. The once immaculate lawn was patchy and overgrown in spots. The house that had been the showcase of the neighborhood during my childhood now showed clear signs of deferred maintenance. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked older than her 61 years, with dark circles under her eyes and hair that had turned completely gray since Christmas. She hugged me tightly, her thin frame feeling fragile against mine. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "It's been so difficult." Inside the house told its own story of financial strain. The furniture was the same as when I left for college, now worn and dated. The kitchen appliances that had been top of the line in the 90s hadn't been updated. Small repairs had been neglected. A cabinet door hung from one hinge. The dishwasher had a handwritten, out-of-order sign taped to it, and the dining room light fixture was missing 3 bulbs. "I've been meaning to fix things up," my mother said, noticing my gaze. "But with your father's hours being cut back at the bank last year, we've had to be careful with expenses." His hours were cut. This was the first I'd heard of any employment issues. "Just to 4 days a week," she explained, busying herself making tea. "The bank has been automating more of their processes. He didn't want to worry you kids with it." After settling in my old bedroom unchanged since high school with faded posters and trophies collecting dust, I asked about their financial situation more directly. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she reluctantly opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a stack of unopened envelopes. "I don't know where to start with these," she admitted. "There are hospital bills, credit card statements, past due notices. Your father always handled the money. I don't even know how much we owe altogether." I spent that evening at the kitchen table sorting through their financial documents. The picture that emerged was alarming. Their mortgage had been refinanced 3 times, each time pulling out equity. Credit cards were nearly maxed out. Retirement accounts had been drawn down to alarming levels. And medical bills were piling up unopened. When I gently asked about the multiple refinances, my mother looked away. "Amanda's wedding was so important to your father. And then she needed help with the down payment on her condo. And there were a few times she had unexpected expenses." The next morning I drove to the hospital to see my father. The confident, intimidating man who had dominated my childhood looked diminished in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and an IV. His complexion was gray, and his voice had lost its authoritative resonance. "You didn't need to come all this way," he said after a cursory greeting. "I'll be back on my feet in no time." "I wanted to be here," I replied, settling into the visitor's chair. "Mom needs support right now, and we need to talk about the bills, Dad." His expression hardened slightly. "It's just a temporary cash flow problem. Once I'm back at work—" "The doctor says that will be at least 3 months, I interrupted gently. "And I've seen the bills at home. This isn't just about the medical expenses." "Your mother shouldn't have shown you those," he snapped, a flash of his old self emerging. "Our finances are not your concern." "They are when you're asking me for help," I countered. "And when the help you need is substantial, I need to understand the complete picture." What began as a discussion about medical bills quickly deteriorated into familiar territory. My father questioned my ability to understand financial matters, referenced Amanda's business acumen, and suggested I should learn responsibility from my sister. When I mentioned seeing evidence that they had been supporting Amanda financially, he became defensive. "We've made some investments in Amanda's future," he insisted. "That's different from bailing someone out. She and Bradley are building something important." The breaking point came when he suggested I should follow Amanda's example to improve my own financial situation. The irony was too much to bear. "Dad," I said quietly but firmly, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who exactly is successful and responsible in this family." His dismissive wave ignited something in me, decades of being underestimated and compared unfavorably to a sister whose apparent success was largely fiction. For the first time in my adult life, I stood my ground with my father instead of retreating. "I'm not that insecure teenager anymore," I told him. "I'm not looking for your approval, but I am asking for your respect, especially if I'm going to help this family out of the financial hole you've dug by enabling Amanda all these years." The monitors registered his increasing heart rate, and a nurse came to check on him. I left shortly after, promising to return the next day when he was feeling stronger. In the hospital parking lot, I made a decision. It was time for a family meeting where all the cards would be laid on the table. I called Amanda that evening and insisted she and Bradley come to our parents' house for dinner on Saturday. Her excuses were immediate and predictable: important work commitments, Bradley's busy schedule, the long drive from Chicago. What surprised me was Bradley's voice in the background contradicting her. "We don't have plans this weekend," he said, clearly audible despite Amanda's attempt to cover the phone. "Your brother is right. We need to have this conversation." After more back and forth, Amanda reluctantly agreed to the dinner. I spent Friday preparing cooking comfort food my mother had taught me to make years ago, organizing financial documents into clear summaries, and mentally rehearsing what needed to be said. My mother watched these preparations with visible anxiety, alternating between helping chop vegetables and wringing her hands. "Maybe this isn't necessary," she suggested more than once. "Your father is still recovering. Amanda's been under so much pressure at work." "Mom," I finally said, taking her hands in mine, "we can't keep pretending. Dad's health depends on reducing his stress long term, not just avoiding difficult conversations now. And that means addressing the financial reality." Saturday evening arrived with palpable tension. Amanda and Bradley were the last to arrive, my sister impeccably dressed as always in designer clothes and perfectly applied makeup. Only someone who knew her well would notice the strain around her eyes or the way she clutched her handbag with white knuckles. Bradley looked uncomfortable maintaining physical distance from Amanda that spoke volumes about their marital state. Dinner began with strained small talk about Dad's recovery prognosis and neighborhood changes. My mother kept glancing nervously between family members while pushing food around her plate. When the meal was finished and coffee served, I knew it was time. I asked everyone here tonight because we need to have an honest conversation about our family's financial situation. I began. Dad's medical bills are significant, and I've discovered that Mom and Dad have been struggling financially for some time now. Amanda immediately went on the defensive. If this is about money, Cedric, we all know you've always been resentful of my success. Just because you chose an unstable career path doesn't mean... Amanda Bradley interrupted quietly. Let him speak. The room fell silent as I placed a folder on the table and opened it. I've prepared some documents I'd like to share with everyone. I began by showing my parents proof of my actual financial situation. Bank statements showing substantial savings, investment account summaries, documentation of my home purchase, and my current employment contract with its impressive salary. Figure. My mother's eyes widened as she looked at the numbers while my father stared in disbelief. This is my actual financial reality, I explained calmly. I've built a successful career in digital design, specializing in financial technology interfaces. I own my home outright. I have zero debt. I have 6 months of expenses saved in an emergency fund and a diverse investment portfolio. I turned to face Amanda directly. Now I think it's time for you to be equally honest about your situation. The color drained from her face. This isn't fair. You're trying to embarrass me in front of everyone. Actually, Bradley interjected. I think this conversation is long overdue. He turned to my parents. Richard, Eleanor, Amanda, and I are separating because of financial dishonesty. She has hidden over $100,000 in credit card debt from me. We're facing possible bankruptcy. My father's face flushed red. That's absurd. Amanda has always been financially responsible. She's a financial consultant. For God's sake. Dad, Amanda said, her voice cracking, it's true. I've been struggling for years. Those loans you and Mom have been giving me, I needed them because I couldn't make ends meet. The condo is in pre-foreclosure. Bradley moved out 3 weeks ago. My mother began to cry quietly while my father's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and confusion. But your job, your success. I was put on probation last month. Amanda admitted, tears now streaming down her face. I've been distracted by trying to hide all this. I might lose my job altogether. For several minutes, the only sounds in the dining room were my mother's soft sobs and Amanda's sniffling. My father sat motionless, staring at the table, as if the wood grain might offer some explanation for how his understanding of his children had been so completely wrong. All these years, he finally said, his voice barely audible, I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. You thought Amanda was the successful one, and I was the failure I completed for him. You've thought that since we were children, you never asked about my actual achievements or finances because they didn't fit the narrative you'd created. My father started to object, then stopped himself, the truth of my words visibly sinking in. For the first time in my memory, he looked at me, really. Looked at me without the filter of disappointment or comparison. I didn't know, he said simply. You didn't want to know, I corrected gently, and that has hurt this family for decades. The days following our family meeting were eerily quiet. My father was released from the hospital to begin his recovery at home, spending most of his time in the recliner watching television with the volume low. My mother moved between caring for him and crying in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening. Amanda returned to Chicago Sunday night, while Bradley stayed in town at a hotel, coming by daily to participate in discussions about their financial options. I extended my stay in Chicago, working remotely from my childhood bedroom while helping my parents navigate their new reality. The first practical step was addressing their immediate financial crisis. I paid off the outstanding medical bills and brought their mortgage current, setting up automatic payments from my account for the next 6 months to give them breathing room. Next, I arranged a meeting with a financial advisor specializing in retirement planning for older adults facing setbacks. Margaret Kim arrived at my parents' house with a compassionate approach that put them at ease as she reviewed their complete financial picture. She created a sustainable budget that accounted for my father's reduced income and ongoing medical expenses, while preserving what remained of their retirement savings. The good news, Margaret explained, is that with some adjustments and Cedric's temporary assistance, you won't need to consider selling the house. The bad news is that retirement will need to be delayed by about 3 years to rebuild your financial cushion. My father, who had been largely silent during the meeting, finally spoke up. I should have planned better. I was so focused on appearances that I lost sight of the actual numbers. Coming from a former bank manager, this admission clearly cost him considerable pride. For Amanda, the path forward was more complicated. After several family discussions, we agreed on a structured approach to her debt. I would pay off her highest interest credit cards to stop the bleeding, but only if she committed to credit counseling and financial therapy to address the emotional aspects of her spending addiction. She would repay me through a formal agreement with moderate interest, not to profit from her situation, but to establish a business-like accountability that had been missing in her financial life. "I don't deserve your help," she told me one evening when we were alone in the kitchen washing dishes. "I've been awful to you for years." "This isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about family, but it is about changing patterns that haven't worked for any of us." With Amanda's permission, I hired a handyman service to make the essential repairs to my parents' home that had been deferred for years. The leaking roof was fixed, broken appliances replaced with modest but functional models, and safety issues addressed. My mother cried when the new dishwasher was installed, realizing how long she had been accommodating increasingly difficult circumstances without complaint. The emotional healing began more tentatively than the practical solutions. My father, whose identity had been so wrapped up in financial success and having the perfect daughter, struggled to reconcile his long-held beliefs with reality. One afternoon during his recovery, he called me into the living room where he was sorting through old family photos. "I found this," he said, holding up a faded certificate from my 8th grade art show. "Your mother kept everything, even when I didn't see the value." It was the closest he could come to an apology at that point, but I recognized the effort it took for him to acknowledge this small piece of evidence that he had been wrong about me. "She always believed in me," I said, accepting the opening he offered. "I just wished you could have too." "I didn't understand your path," he admitted. "I thought there was only one road to success, the one I had taken. I was wrong about that." My mother's journey toward healing took a different form. With my father occupied by recovery and physical therapy, she began spending time with me independently for perhaps the first time. We cooked together, went for short walks around the neighborhood, and gradually rebuilt a relationship that wasn't defined by her role as mediator between my father and me. "I should have stood up for you more," she confessed during one of our walks. "I knew how special your talents were, but I was afraid of causing conflict." "You did your best, Mom," I assured her. "We all did what we thought was right at the time." Amanda's process was perhaps the most difficult. Years of being the golden child had created a fragile self-image that depended on constant external validation. When the facade crumbled, she had to confront not only her financial mistakes but her participation in a family dynamic that had hurt her brother deeply. Her first attempts at apology were defensive, focused more on explaining her behavior than taking responsibility for it. "You have to understand, I was under so much pressure to be perfect," she said, during one difficult conversation. "Everyone expected me to succeed." "I understand that pressure was real," I acknowledged. "But you also benefited from it while I was hurt by it. We both need to recognize those truths." The family began attending therapy sessions together when my father was strong enough to participate. Dr. Susan Chen, a family therapist specializing in adult sibling relationships, helped us navigate the complex emotions and entrenched patterns that had defined our relationships for decades. She introduced the concept of family roles and how we had all been constrained by the narrative of the golden child and the disappointment. "These roles served a function in your family system," Dr. Chen explained, "but they haven't allowed any of you to be fully seen or known by each other. The challenge now is to relate as the adults you actually are, not the roles you've been assigned." 6 months after my father's heart attack, the changes in our family were subtle but significant. My father had begun asking genuine questions about my work, making an effort to understand digital design, even though it remained somewhat foreign to his experience. When I explained a particularly complex project involving retirement planning visualization, he offered insights from his banking background that actually improved my approach. My mother found her voice in small but meaningful ways, expressing preferences and opinions more freely. She started a part-time job at a local bookstore, her first paid employment in 30 years. The modest income boosted her confidence as much as the family's budget. Amanda relocated to a smaller apartment and found a position at a nonprofit organization, helping low-income families with financial literacy work that paid less but aligned better with her values and skills. Her marriage with Bradley remained separated, but not divorced, with both attending couples counseling to determine whether their relationship could be rebuilt on a more honest foundation. Family gatherings became less performance-oriented and more genuine. Achievements were celebrated without comparison, and struggles were discussed openly rather than hidden. The pretense that had characterized our interactions for so long gradually gave way to authentic connection based on who we actually were, not who our parents had imagined us to be. I maintained my life in Boston, but visited more frequently, establishing a relationship with my family that felt supportive without being enmeshed. For the first time, I could love them without feeling diminished by them. And perhaps more importantly, I could finally believe they were beginning to love the real me, rather than constantly wishing I were someone else. 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, my parents visited my home in Boston for the first time. I watched their faces as they took in the converted factory space with its high ceilings and expansive windows, the well-appointed kitchen where I had discovered a passion for cooking, and the home office where I created the designs that had built my career. "This is really something, Cedric," my father said, running his hand along the exposed brick wall. "You've built a beautiful life here." The simple acknowledgement meant more to me than he could possibly know. I had prepared dinner for them. Nothing elaborate, just well-executed comfort food served on the handmade ceramic dishes I'd collected from local artists. As we sat around my dining table, the conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had in my memory. "I need to say something," my father announced as we finished our meal. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I was wrong about you, Cedric. About many things. I was so fixated on a certain definition of success that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. He paused, the words clearly difficult for him. "I'm proud of the man you've become. Without my help, despite my limitations as a father." From Richard Collins, this halting apology represented a seismic shift. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "We both are," she added, "so very proud." That evening marked a new chapter in our family story. Not a perfect happy ending, those exist only in fairy tales, but a more honest beginning based on who we really were rather than who we had pretended to be. My own healing journey continued to unfold in layers. The initial vindication I felt when my financial success was finally acknowledged gave way to deeper understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped all of us. Through therapy and self-reflection, I processed the anger I had carried for decades, not to eliminate it, as some of it was entirely justified, but to prevent it from defining my future relationships. I learned to accept validation from within, rather than constantly seeking it from my family. The little voice that had always whispered "not good enough" whenever I achieved something became quieter, gradually replaced by confidence in my own judgment and values. I discovered that breaking free from the role of family disappointment allowed me to define success on my own terms, measured not by comparison to others, but by alignment with my authentic self. Perhaps most challenging was finding compassion for my parents and sister, without excusing the hurt they had caused. I came to understand that my father's rigid expectations stemmed from his own father's criticism, that my mother's inability to stand up for me reflected her fear of conflict, and that Amanda's desperate maintenance of appearances masked profound insecurity. This understanding didn't erase the past, but it did help me move forward without bitterness. The transformation in my personal life influenced my professional choices as well. Remembering how difficult it had been to pursue a creative career without support, I established a mentorship program for young designers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Once a month, I opened my office to high school students interested in digital design, teaching basic skills and offering guidance about education and career paths. Seeing their talent bloom with just a little encouragement became one of my greatest joys. At industry conferences, I began speaking openly about mental health challenges in creative fields, sharing how perfectionism and imposter syndrome had affected my early career. These presentations resonated deeply with colleagues who had faced similar struggles, creating connections based on shared vulnerability rather than carefully curated images of success. My work itself evolved to incorporate more meaning beyond technical excellence. I began partnering with financial literacy nonprofits, similar to the one where Amanda now worked, designing interfaces that made budgeting and saving accessible to people without financial backgrounds. This marriage of my technical skills with genuine social impact brought a depth of satisfaction that exceeded anything I had experienced in my career thus far. Amanda and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, replacing the competitive dynamic of our childhood with mutual support for our very different paths. She visited Boston quarterly for what we called sibling strategy sessions, where we reviewed each other's progress and challenges without our parents' influence. She found her authentic voice working with families in financial crisis, drawing on her own experiences to offer both practical advice and genuine empathy. I spent so many years trying to appear successful, she confided during one of these visits. It's such a relief to actually be helpful instead. My parents continued their own evolution, albeit more gradually. My father joined a support group for heart attack survivors, where he formed friendships based on mutual vulnerability rather than status competition. My mother volunteered at her church's food pantry, discovering fulfillment in service that had nothing to do with maintaining appearances. They downsized to a smaller home that better suited their retirement needs, letting go of the showcase house that had represented so much of their former values. Looking back on our family's journey, I realized how powerfully the narratives we tell about ourselves and others shape our perceptions and choices. For decades, our family had been trapped in a story with assigned roles: the successful daughter, the disappointing son, the proud father, the supportive mother. None of us had been fully seen or known within those constraints. Breaking free from these false narratives wasn't easy. It required painful honesty, willing vulnerability, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. But on the other side of that difficult passage, we found relationships based on authenticity, rather than performance acceptance, rather than conditional approval, and love that embraced reality instead of fantasy. The most profound lesson I learned through this journey was that true success comes not from meeting others' expectations or accumulating impressive credentials, but from living authentically according to your own values. The freedom I found in honest relationships, even when those relationships included acknowledging painful histories, far exceeded any temporary comfort that came from maintaining illusions. The invisible child I had been for so many years finally became visible, first to myself, then to my family, and ultimately to a world where my unique perspective and talents could make a meaningful contribution. The story my family had told about me turned out to be fiction, but the story I was now writing for myself was authentic, imperfect, and genuinely mine. If you've ever felt unseen or undervalued by the people who should know you best, I hope my story offers some comfort and perspective. Our worth isn't determined by others' limited perceptions, and it's never too late to rewrite the narratives that have defined our relationships. Have you experienced being unfairly compared to siblings or living in someone else's shadow? Share your story in the comments. You might help someone else feel less alone. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their true value isn't determined by family narratives. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the most important person who needs to see your worth is looking back at you in the mirror every day.